lurks around the corner.
There is only me. There is only my way.
My childhood home is a place I remember well, for its memories of better and younger days, but I also remember it well for things of a darker nature. The sensation of being watched and figures moving in the darkness. I remember seeing a dark figure in my parents' bedroom at night, one which would simply stare at me, motionless and menacing. I would see fleeting dark shapes out of the corner of my eye that would vanish the moment I turned to look in their direction. I recall my older brother telling me on more than one occasion that he found himself unable to move in the middle of the night, and a terrifying black figure with glowing red eyes loomed over him and filled his heart with dread. Stories of dark humanoid figures stalking people have been told for centuries, and in our age of the internet, it is no different. Maybe they appear in dreams or night terrors. Maybe they are seen briefly in one's peripheral vision. Maybe they are recorded, but aren't noticed until a review of the footage. And maybe they are seen brazenly with the naked eye. But concerning the so-called shadow people, what are they? What do they want? And most importantly, just how dangerous are they to you and me? Welcome to Phobicon, where we explore what we fear the most. But before we begin, please like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you a thing, and you can always back out anytime you want. This video also features topics associated with drug abuse. For the love of God, do not construe anything in this video as medical advice. Phobicon does not condone, endorse, encourage, or even remotely suggest the use of any substance which is contrary to its intended function. With that out of the way, let's get started.
A dark age when the world was haunted by strange fears and superstition.
Shadow people, as they are called, are a mysterious phenomenon, but one that has been witnessed by many since the dawn of civilization. The oldest mention of such beings comes from Babylonian and Mesopotamian myth in the form of the demons known as Alu. Alu were described as having no mouth, ears, or lips. Half human and half animal, they would roam the land and terrorize their sleeping victims for their own enjoyment. They would stalk the dark and deserted places and ruins, and could take various animal forms, changing from the size of a mountain to as small as a housefly. They were especially feared for their power to enter the houses of people and cause sleep paralysis and terrible hallucinations. The Alu are associated with Nergal, the god of death and the lord of the underworld. Moving forward in time, Depictions of nightly visitations from demonic forces can be found as far back as the 1700s with the incubus or succubus. In fact, in European folklore, the night hag was an entity believed to be responsible for sleep paralysis and was often seen as a sign of witchcraft. The term nightmare was used in the same context prior to the more modern meaning, whereby it is simply a bad dream, without necessarily any paralysis involved. A mare was a particularly malevolent entity that was regarded as nothing more than a demon. Mares were believed to exhaust horses by night, entangle both the hairs of men and beasts while they slept. Much of the meaning behind the name of mare relates to pressing or trampling. Mares could even affect trees, leading to their branches becoming gnarled and twisted. A mare was believed to be capable of taking the forms of animals or objects and drained the life energy of its victims. In pre-Islamic Arabia, the creature known as the jinn was feared, yet also venerated for its power and danger to human beings. And when one suffered from a sleep paralysis attack, it would be referred to as a jinn attack. These attacks could even be fatal. Among the Native Americans, particularly that of the Choctaw Nation, there is a being known as Nalusa Cheeto. He is described as the Soul Eater, a being of complete darkness. If one allows evil thoughts to enter their minds, Nalusa Cheeto will creep inside of them and devour their souls. Many people of the Choctaw Nation will not say his name in fear of summoning him. Fast forward to the modern day, and we can find a similar folklore about these beings. Plenty of commonalities with their ancient counterparts. They can appear in a plethora of different types and outfits. Some can appear in groups, others alone. Some only the outline of a human figure. Others wearing clothing and hats or hoods. They are said by their witnesses to move fast and phase through solid matter, often disappearing in the blink of an eye. During a show on Art Bell's Coast to Coast broadcast, many were asked to share drawings of shadow people which they had witnessed. These are their accounts. The shadow person had longer arms and legs than a normal person, and was also around 4 feet in height. It was also hard to get an exact size of the shadow person because it ran across the street really fast. Shadow people that I saw were sort of fuzzy on the outside, and I don't remember them moving, but I do remember one of them sitting on my bed, and it made an impression in my bed as I was lying on it. I was about 7 when I saw this. Here is my depiction of the shadow people that visited me for a month every night. I saw them straight on. They were full of mischief but evil. They don't visit me anymore, thank God. Here is my depiction of a shadow person who haunts me continually. I've been seeing these things for years. I've called them shadow things because I have seen shapes that are vaguely humanoid, and many more that are bird-like, some of which are quite large. I believe that I have been touched by them as well. Not at all pleasant, I must say. Best I can do, they are always crouching and are very tall and thin. They move like the wind. But folklore is only the surface of this sinister happening. It is in fact much darker and much closer to home than you might think. And it all starts with a pink pill one can find just about everywhere.
I'm ready for it now. They are lined up in grooves to make filling easier.
Chemical warfare.
It was a school night in 2010, and I finally lied down to go to sleep. I'd been dealing with a bit of insomnia for the past few days, so I took a Benadryl and waited for the usual drowsiness to kick in. I closed my eyes, and before I knew it, I was in dreamland. This dream, however, would not be what I'd expect. It opened like an old TV documentary from the 90s. The setting was a large and very old home. The film crew was interviewing children about paranormal activity in their house. During the interview, each child would at some point stop mid-sentence and shriek at something off-camera. The camera would pan over, sometimes not seeing what they saw. However, on more than one occasion, it caught sight of something disturbing. Above the top of the door frame was the silhouette of something part man and part beast, with horns like a bull and dancing a bestial dance like something out of the distant past. Other times, the camera would capture a charred reptilian monster with red eyes lurking in the shadows of the hallways. Eventually, I found myself in a new location with a camera in my own hands. Me and my mom stood in front of a large old building on an urban street. It was raining hard as we entered to investigate the structure. When we walked in, we only had a narrow space to move through due to the large piles of boxes on either side. My mom took a few steps, then tripped and fell, hitting the carpeted floor incredibly hard. I immediately asked her if she was okay. When she turned to look at me, she had a terrified expression on her face. A voice came out of her mouth that was not hers. It was a terrible and growling voice that screamed, while locusts and bugs flew out of her throat in a swarm. At that moment, I woke up. But in the first few moments of being awake, I swear I saw the silhouette of a horned monster dancing above my doorframe. Needless to say, I never did take Benadryl again. As it would happen, I'm not the only person to ever experience terrifying things while under the influence of this drug. DPH, or diphenhydramine, is an over-the-counter antihistamine and sedative, which is used to treat allergies and insomnia. It can also behave as a potent hallucinogen, one which is in fact in its own category of hallucinogens. For instance, psychedelics like LSD cause non-ordinary mental states and an apparent expansion of consciousness. The visuals associated with this are the most commonly used in things like entertainment, media, and art. Things like trippy visuals and music videos. Dissociatives like ketamine produce feelings of detachment from the environment and the self. These are less common and can be a bit more difficult to describe or depict. The third class are called deliriants, and they are the least studied class of hallucinogen in terms of their effects, both short-term and long-term, on the body and the mind of the user. They are ultimately defined by the mental state which they induce in the user, namely, that of delirium. The effects of deliriant use can include the following: stupor, agitation, confusion, confabulation, emotional bluntness, dysphoria, memory deficits, incoherency of thoughts, hypoactivity or hyperactivity, lucid intervals, realistic visual hallucinations or illusions, and regression to phantom behaviors such as disrobing, plucking, or interacting with imaginary objects or scenes. The user has minimal control over their actions and may have little or no recollection of the experience afterwards. Datura is among the most notable of all deliriants, and it has the longest history of traditional use among native peoples across the world, particularly as it relates to shamanistic practices. Ken Hedges, who is curator of archaeology at the San Diego Museum of Man, recalled how, when he was a student at San Diego's Mount Miguel High School in 1960, 2 teenage boys who sampled datura were found on that town's main street at night, quote-unquote, in a state of mind that could only be called extremely deranged. They were walking from streetlight to streetlight, banging their heads on each pole until they were covered with blood. Hedge also claimed that even among native Indians, terrifying visions were often the result for those who submitted themselves to the plant's power. Anthropological assessment of the sacred datura cult in Southern California ascertained that within the tribe, frequent or repeat users of datura tended to gradually become more and more antisocial, often adopting behavior patterns that the rest of the tribe viewed as capricious malevolence. During an on-camera interview, author of The God Molecule, Gerardo Ruben Sandoval Isaac, explained that in the Oaxaca mushroom village of San Jose del Pacifico, the psilocybin mushrooms are regarded as being related to light, and that brugmansia, another deliriant plant, is related to the darkness, and that the tribes are aware of the polarity of this flower, further crediting the idea that the hallucinogenic experience produced by deliriants is typically of a dark and disturbing nature. When datura was first formally discovered in colonial Jamestown, Virginia in 1676, it was during Bacon's Rebellion, and it was discovered by English soldiers. They spent 11 days in altered mental states after using the leaves of the plant as part of a salad, having no idea of its psychoactive effects. Historian Robert Beverly Jr. wrote of the observable effects seen during their intoxicated state. They turned natural fools upon it for several days. One would blow up a feather in the air, another would dart straws at it with much fury, and another, stark naked, was sitting up in a corner like a monkey, grinning and making mouths at them. A fourth would fondly kiss and paw at his companions, and sneer in their faces with a countenance more antic than any in a Dutch droll. They were not very cleanly, for they would have wallowed in their own excrements if they had not been prevented. 1,000 such simple tricks they played, and after 11 days returned to themselves again, not remembering anything that had happened. While datura or angel's trumpet may not be readily available in America, DPH can be found in almost any grocery store across the country under its usual brand name, Benadryl, and its dangers are no less terrible than any other deliriant. More troubling still is its prevalence as an addictive substance. In 2017, it was listed as one of the 10 most common substances attributed to fatal drug overdoses in the US. In 2020, a TikTok trend known as the Benadryl Challenge encouraged users to film themselves taking large doses of DPH in order to induce hallucinations. Tragically, more than one child followed the encouragement of said challenge, and it had fatal consequences. TikTok has since banned any related words with which someone could even try and find content pushing the challenge. thankfully. But the damage has been done. All of this would be dark enough on its own, but how does it relate to a discussion over the mysterious entities known as shadow people? Among those who have taken DPH, there is a commonality, namely that of the existence of shadow people and their hallucinations. Their prevalence is beyond that of merely existing in the corner of one's eyes, but extends to full-blown intelligent interactions with these strange beings. There is one in particular that has a following of his own, however, and he is simply known as the Hatman. Described as a tall, dark figure wearing a fedora-style hat and an old trench coat, the Hatman is experienced by people within and outside of DPH use, although his relationship to the drug has created a cult following of sorts online. This practice views the Hatman as an eternal father, and DPH is viewed as a kind of sacrament of initiation, whereby one must take dangerous levels of the drug in order to communicate with the being, to receive his blessing to join the group. The realm where he and other shadow people are said to dwell is known as Ariel. One of the core beliefs is that DPH can alter one's soul, and if one communes with Hatman and other shadow people, then they could possibly become a shadow person themselves upon death. Beyond the apparent internet worship, Hatman is an urban legend figure with an entire genre of memes featuring him and DPH abuse. But the tales of interacting with him are often disturbing, to say the least. Most of those who have encountered him have experienced a horrible sensation of pure dread. His presence is also associated with other paranormal phenomena, such as unexplained scratches and even physical harm. Consider the tale of former aerospace pilot and manager Bill Vail, who in the early 2000s, in addition to being plagued by sinister paranormal phenomena, described an encounter with this very being in his book Satanic Warfare: Tactics of the Demonic. Just then, the covers were pulled off my body. I sat up in bed, seeing something dark and menacing at the footboard. It was the body of a man. It stood 6 feet tall, wearing a fedora and either a duster or trench coat. As soon as I saw it, it began moving toward me. Rather than appearing to walk with arm and leg movements, it floated, as if pulled by an unknown force. It was totally black, devoid of any light, reflection. Although I had experienced fear many times in my life, this felt the worst. It felt pure evil. I didn't know the intent of this entity, and I was trapped. I had nowhere to go. Timothy Brown Jr. founded the Hatman Project in 2001 after looking into his own experiences into the Hatman and hearing accounts from other witnesses. The website has a collection of stories related to shadow people and the Hatman. There is an estimated release date for a book that was originally in January of this year, but as of yet, no book has been released. Hopefully, this will change in the future. One interesting anecdote concerning the history of Hatman. When the Spanish settled in California in the 1700s, they would tell stories of beings they called the Dark Watchers. Travelers in the Santa Lucia Mountains would report tall, dark humanoids who would silently watch wanderers on the trails and would suddenly disappear. These beings would range from 7 to 15 feet tall. and were reported to wear long flowing cloaks, and most notably, wide-brimmed hats. But what exactly is the Hatman? What are shadow people? And why would substances like DPH enable human beings to interact with seemingly intelligent entities?
You want to see something really scary?
Now, let's take this three-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a fourth physical dimension.
While I have my own theories as to what Hatman and shadow people are, I think it is important to lay the groundwork for understanding how these sorts of experiences can happen in the first place, and how reality and our relationship to it can be far stranger than we assume. It is easy to take for granted that everything we experience is something fed to us by our brain and nervous system. Keep in mind, our brain is sitting inside a pitch-black bone jar with various instruments and tools it uses to attempt to make sense of what is outside of that bone jar. It only perceives a certain amount of information at a time, and only what its instruments can pick up. Then, it filters that down into something usable to us. Every step in this process fundamentally is a doorway for errors and inaccuracies in perception. Consider when you're looking for a pencil, only to discover it was in your hand the entire time. Where was it before it entered your perception? We ultimately have to accept certain assumptions about reality and our perception of it in order to even function in a day-to-day existence. We have to assume things exist after we stop looking at them, and that when we leave our house in the morning, that it's the same house we were in when we were left. We only see a certain portion of the electromagnetic spectrum as light, only perceive a portion of the auditory spectrum as sound, and only interact with 3 dimensions. Whatever lies beyond those margins is outside of our perception. Consider, if an entity emitted light or sound lower than your ability to perceive it, would you even know it was there? What if it existed in 4 dimensions instead of just 3? Keep these questions in mind as we explore the different explanations for shadow people going forward. Sleep paralysis is a very real condition which affects around 8% of the population. During an episode of sleep paralysis, one can find themselves unable to move, while at the same time experiencing panic, terror, and horrifying visual and auditory hallucinations. While the pathophysiology of sleep paralysis has not yet been identified, there are a few theories. One is that sleep paralysis is associated with a disruption in REM sleep patterns. Those with sleep paralysis are often found to have shorter REM sleep cycles, and there can be a dysfunctional overlap between these deeper states of dreaming and waking states. Another theory is that the neural functions which regulate sleep are out of balance, leading to a case where one can be aroused out of a deep sleep, but not enough to enter a waking state, whereby paralysis and hallucinations can occur. It is interesting to note that although the experiences one would associate with sleep paralysis are universal, their specific cultural expressions are unique and regional. Over 100 terms have been identified that correlate to this phenomena. In addition, it is theorized that certain cultural beliefs and fears associated with these experiences could lead to a greater prevalence of them. Consistent with this theory, In Egypt, there are elaborate beliefs about sleep paralysis, namely that it is the attack of an evil jinn, and can even result in the death of the victim. Whereas in Denmark, there are no significant supernatural beliefs about the phenomena. A study comparing rates and the characteristics of sleep paralysis in Egypt and Denmark found that the phenomenon is 3 times more common in Egypt versus Denmark. This could very well have credence in the sense that our beliefs, especially those both us and those around us believe, will affect our perceptions in a very tangible way. However, it does not explain everything. For one, it does not explain the instances whereby people have witnessed this phenomena outside of sleep paralysis or dreamlike states. For two, the limiting effects of culture upon perception do not disprove something's existence. Let's say there are 2 men on a desert island. One believes he will be rescued and survive, while the other believes it is hopeless and he will die. Who do you think is more likely to live through such a scenario? The man who believes he will be rescued will not only put forth the effort and the thought into survival, but his brain will likely become more trained to perceive information which will aid him in his survival. The other man will have the exact opposite effect. He will find more confirmation of his fate, and his brain will search for things to confirm this assumption. The belief that these entities are in fact aliens or beings from another dimension is not new by any means. Stories of men in black who arrive after prevalent sightings of UFO-type phenomena in order to intimidate witnesses began in the 1950s and the 1960s. In 1947, after allegedly witnessing a UFO in Washington, Harold Dahl was visited by a man in black who told him not to discuss what he had seen. UFOlogist Albert K. Bender was visited by 3 men in black suits in 1953 who communicated with him telepathically. In the second encounter with them, he explained they appeared shadowy and floated above the floor. Another area of overlap with shadow people is that of alien abduction. Abductees often describe paralysis, terror, and shadowy figures. Kelly Cahill's abduction in 1993 is one example. During a nighttime drive, they witnessed a UFO and experienced a time gap, whereby upon returning home, she discovered a triangular mark above her navel. Undergoing regressive hypnosis, she described the creature she saw as follows. It was black, not a black color, but black as if all matter was removed where its presence was. Kelly would later describe it as not having a soul. Kelly's words for the alien were void of color, yet its shape was clearly discernible. The black alien entity was taller than an average man, about 7 feet tall, according to Kelly, and its eyes were large like a fly's, glowing red. However, one notable ufologist disagreed with the extraterrestrial theory and instead postulated a different one. John Keel, the author of the Mothman prophecies in 1975, as he traveled the Midwest and interviewed various witnesses of UFO phenomena, abandoned the extraterrestrial hypothesis as he found a considerable overlap between psychic phenomena and that which was associated with UFOs. He began to utilize the term ultraterrestrials to designate what he believed were shape-shifting supernatural entities from superspectrum or the upper frequencies of the electromagnetic spectrum, and could only become visible when they descended to the very narrow range of light that is visible to the human eye. He believed that they sought to control and manipulate humans. According to Keel, these ultra-terrestrials, or UTs, cultivate belief in various frames of references and then deliberately create new manifestations which support those beliefs. While there are some cases, like that of Cahill, that might lend some weight to this theory, it quickly begins to become less a theory that these are extraterrestrials and more so extra-dimensional beings who are possibly imperceptible to the naked eye unless certain conditions are met. If that's the case, then wouldn't that make them closer to that of spirits than aliens? Full disclosure, before I continue on this last theory, this is the one which I believe has the most weight behind it. All of my research into the folklore and the traditional practices of deliriants, in my opinion, support this theory. Now, I have my own biases, of course. I'm not completely without bias, but in my opinion, folklore can have a kind of wisdom to it. It is rife with heuristics or rules of thumb, which are often intimately related to realities which those who came before us faced. To reject this as entirely false would be modern hubris. All of the stories which we find going back to ancient civilizations describe shadow people as malevolent and supernatural beings from dark realms, not of the living, as in, not where we as human beings dwell. As I've explained, we as human beings only dwell in a small sliver of light, sound, and spatial dimensions, whereby it is even possible to perceive anything of note, let alone everything. Even among this sliver, we still only perceive a fraction, based off of what our brain allows us to see. Theories stating that these entities are extra-dimensional beings are really just a modern way of interpreting what the ancients would have likely called demons or spirits. And I'm a fan of interpreting the new with the old, rather than the old with the new. The relationship of fear, possession, poltergeist activity, scratches and bruises, and unexplainable noises with shadow people cannot and should not be overlooked. Often enough, these phenomena coincide with one another in an escalating fashion, and visual manifestations such as shadow people are a symptom of something dangerous getting worse. Christian iconography depicts demons as charred black figures, and even the jinn are often shown with darker forms. The following is an account of some of the beings Saint Theodora encountered at the hour of death in the 10th century. When I drew near the end of my life, and the time of my departure hence had come, I saw a great multitude of dark beings who had surrounded my couch. Their faces were dark like soot and pitch. Their eyes were like glowing coals. Their entire appearance was as frightening and evil as the fiery hell itself. They began to grow indignant and to make noise like dogs. Others howled like wolves. As they looked at me, they were full of anger. They threatened me, kept rushing at me and gnashing their teeth, and appeared ready to devour me. Yet they seemed to wait for a judge who had not yet come, but would do so. They were making ready charts and unrolling scrolls on which were written all my evil deeds. My miserable soul was taken by great fear and trembling. Not only the bitterness of death tormented me, but even more the terrible appearance and the cruel demeanor of the frightening dark beings. These were to me like another death, only a worse one. I kept turning away my eyes in all directions so as to not see their terrible faces, and wished not to hear their voices, but I was unable to be rid of them. They turned everywhere, and there was no one to help me.
I have plenty of theories. Maybe what you can explain to me is why it's bureau policy to label these cases as unexplained phenomena and ignore them.
Are you lost, sweetheart?
I do believe that many of these theories are simply explaining different sides to the same phenomenon, namely that of beings which occupy regions of space, light, and audio outside of what we can perceive. The sleep paralysis side explains much of the physical, psychological, cultural, and neurological aspects that can occur. The alien and extra-dimensional side utilizes a more secular or modern vernacular to describe the reality of where these beings reside, and the religious, spiritual, or demonic side explains their nature as that of malevolent and dangerous beings which are harmful to humans. If an intelligent entity, say, existed in 4 dimensions, and was composed of something outside of our visible light spectrum and outside of the audible spectrum, would we be able to perceive it? It could be right next to us and we would be completely unaware unless it wanted to intentionally reveal its presence to us. Perhaps the use of substances like DPH can bypass natural filters in our perception and allow us to see things which we ultimately shouldn't, but which absolutely exist. I'm reminded of entertainment like Stranger Things or Silent Hill, where there is a sort of invisible side B to reality which is more than capable of interacting with our own. One which is dark, like an underbelly, rife with terrifying creatures beyond imagining. I believe it is more than plausible that there are huge regions of this reality we just cannot see or explore, which harbor strange beings that can be frightening and even harmful to us. On a concluding note, the traditional shamanic usages of psychedelic substances and the almost universal association of deliriants with negative and evil entities should be taken seriously. If we assume all of this to be true, then to abuse something like DPH in a modern setting would obviously be dangerous not merely on a physical level, but a spiritual one. Moreover, the ancient practice of pharmakeia, or using mind-altering substances for ritual, worship, or magic, is extremely old. I also might add as an anecdote that in literary traditions like those present in the Book of Enoch, this practice was not merely something discovered by man, but rather revealed to him by malevolent fallen beings. Food for thought. All this being said, are they real? Maybe. But I wouldn't exactly call myself much of a skeptic. Perhaps I need an Agent Scully type character to balance out my Fox Mulder persona. But shadow people have haunted the minds of many for centuries, and it doesn't seem to have changed much in the age of the internet. And I foresee that they will continue to cast their silhouette for generations to come. But I will leave a bit of advice for what you can do as a human being, possibly surrounded by God knows how many of these invisible beings. And the advice comes from Saint Anthony the Great, a spiritual giant who lived in the 4th century and spent his life battling against evil spirits in the deserts of Egypt in a very literal way. So then, we ought to fear God only, and despise the demons, and be in no fear of them. But the more they do these things, the more let us intensify our discipline against them. For a good life and faith in God is a great weapon. At any rate, they fear the fasting, the sleeplessness, the prayers, the meekness, the quietness, the contempt of money and vainglory, the humility, the love of the poor, the alms, the freedom from anger of the ascetics, and chief of all, their piety towards Christ. Wherefore they do all things, that they may not have any that trample on them, knowing the grace given to the faithful against them by the Savior, when he says, "Behold, I have given you the power to tread upon serpents and scorpions, and upon all the power of the enemy." If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. It was a treat to research this topic, and I tried to keep it both informing and entertaining. And given that this is my first actual video that I'm posting on the platform, I tried to do a decent job, but what do you think? Do you believe shadow people exist? Or do you believe this is all baloney and that I have a completely trash take and I just wasted all of my time and your time and everybody else's time? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. This has been your host, BC, and I'll see you in the next chapter of Phobicon.